Good morning, and thank you for everybody who's here today. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's hearing. We'll consider the nominations of Brigadier General Brian Nesvik to serve as Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Jessica Kramer to serve as Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water, and Sean Donahue to serve as General Counsel at the EPA. General Nesvik has more than 29 years of experience with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department prior to his retirement last September, where he was going to go ranching permanently until he told me when he came to see. So he's got a little kink in the system here, and we're glad he does. During his tenure with the department, he served in various roles, including Chief Game Warden and Wildlife Division Chief, until ultimately being appointed the Director in 2019. Wyoming is a world-renowned destination for hunters and anglers, and General Nesvik led the state's wildlife management programs, ensuring that the conservation of species and recreational existence can coexist for generations to come. Simultaneously to his full-time job with the Wyoming Game and Fish, General Nesvik served in the Wyoming Army National Guard. His service included deployments to Kuwait and Iraq and progressively more senior leaderships, culminating in his final posting as the commander of the Wyoming Army National Guard. After 35 years of service, General Nesvik retired from the National Guard in 2021 at the rank of Brigadier General. Thank you, General Nesvik, for your service to our country. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or the service, needs greater structure and efficiency, so it will benefit to have a former general as its director. As the director of the service, General Nesvik will be tasked with overseeing the operations of the agency to conserve and manage our nation's wildlife and natural habitats. Under the Biden administration, the Endangered Species Act was leveraged to slow down and sometimes even halt infrastructure projects going through the federal permitting process. We must be able to efficiently permit projects while protecting wildlife and natural habitats at the same time. General Nesvik will oversee many other issues, such as the management of the 570 National Wildlife Refuges and implementation of congressionally authorized conservation programs. I trust that his background will offer him a unique perspective on how the service can better manage wildlife programs and protect species without hindering critical infrastructure projects. I look forward to hearing his testimony. This morning we will also hear from Jess Kramer, we call her Jess, Jess, President Trump's nominee to serve as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water. This committee has a long tradition of working in a bipartisan manner to strengthen environmental policies, improve water infrastructure, and ensure federal regulations are effective, not unnecessarily burdensome. Clean water is not a partisan issue. It is essential to the health, safety, and economic well-being of every American. The Office of Water plays a critical role in ensuring access to safe and reliable water for all Americans. That means ensuring federal programs like the state revolving funds are effective, addressing PFAS contamination without undue burdens on ratepayers, and working with state and local governments to streamline permitting. Jess is well qualified to lead the EPA's water office. She's built a career crafting practical, bipartisan solutions to improve water policy and ensure communities, regardless of their size and geography. She's also worked to have us have access to safe and reliable drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. During Jess's time working with me on the EPA and the EPW committee, she played a key role in shaping the water provisions in the IIJA, securing historic investments to modernize drinking water and wastewater systems, remove lead service lines, and address emerging contaminants. Beyond her experience on Capitol Hill, she has served in both state and federal roles, most recently as the Deputy Secretary of Regulatory Programs at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, where she oversaw critical programs related to water quality, permitting, and enforcement. Jess understands that environmental protection and economic growth can go hand in hand, and she knows how to ensure regulations are clear, fair, and based on sound science. This morning, we will also hear from Sean Donahue, the nominee to serve as General Counsel at the EPA. The EPA's Office of General Counsel serves as the chief legal advisor to the agency, providing critical guidance on implementing environmental laws like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Superfund. The General Counsel plays a central role in shaping EPA's policies, ensuring legal compliance, defending the agency from legal challenges, and advising on matters that impact communities nationwide. The office also works closely with Congress, EPA regional offices, and enforcement teams to provide the legal foundation for strong environmental protections. Mr. Donahue has served for 3 years in the prior Trump administration at the EPA as a special advisor, including working in the agency's Office of Land and Emergency Management. After working at the agency, Mr. Donahue joined a law firm in Buffalo, New York, where he practiced environmental law. And in 2024, he served as a counsel for a solar energy development company in New York State. In 2025, Mr. Donahue was appointed Principal Deputy General Counsel at the EPA. He currently serves as a special advisor in the EPA Administrator's Office. With his experience in both private practice and at the agency, I look forward to hearing more about Sean Donahue's qualifications and vision for this important role. With that, I now recognize my ranking member, Senator Whitehouse, and I would like to welcome Senator Barrasso, and he'll give him a chance here to introduce the general shortly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to take my time this morning to discuss something that's going on with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a fund that was appropriated by Congress, obligated, and the funds disbursed to a private fiscal agent, Citibank. But because it relates to climate, and because the president insists falsely that climate change is a hoax, people who are subordinate to him feel obliged to go after this greenhouse gas reduction fund. The problem is that the manner in which they have gone after it reflects the actual weaponization of the Department of Justice in ways that the prosecutions of President Trump never saw. So it begins with the interim United States Attorney saying publicly, before he's even in office, that this fund is total graft and needs to be stopped. So he's already announced his predilections about that. This fund includes nefarious actors like Habitat for Humanity. The veto clock had run, so there was no role to undo the funding. It was even disbursed, as I mentioned. So what they had to do was to try to cook up a way to freeze the fund. And the way they tried to cook up to freeze the fund was to create a pretend criminal investigation. And then they could point to the criminal investigation and tell Citibank to freeze the funds pending the criminal investigation. The problem was there's no evidence of any crime. And that became apparent when the ask went from interim U.S. Attorney Martin to the chief of the criminal division in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, and was told by the chief, there's no crime here, I cannot do that. Rather than stop, what he did was force the resignation, fired the career criminal chief. This is a guy who's never been a prosecutor before, and he's firing his criminal chief. So that's a pretty big red flag when you get an answer from the career staff saying, boss, there's no crime here, and then you fire them for telling you that. Then he tried to shop this notion around the office, and no career U.S. attorney would sign. I've been a U.S. attorney. It's almost unfathomable for a U.S. attorney's office to send out a pleading without a career attorney being involved. So he couldn't get a career attorney. Another big red flag. So then he went forward himself. Again, this is not an experienced prosecutor. This is not somebody who brings a lot of game with him. He just wanted to do it. So with no support from the career people in the office, he went forward alone. The alone bid is another very strong signal that something is very badly amiss in what's going on. So then, going ahead solo, as the interim U.S. attorney, he went before a magistrate judge who said, no dice, you got nothing here, and he shot him down. For a U.S. attorney's office to be shot down over a warrant application is like a hospital never event. If that ever happened in Rhode Island when I was the U.S. attorney, there would be after-action investigations, reports, what the hell went on here, because you never want to put your federal judges in a position where they have to shoot down a warrant application of yours. You want to make sure that they are ironclad. So this failure by the U.S. attorney to get the magistrate judge to go along with him, that's yet another red flag flying. And then after that, they started shopping it around other U.S. attorneys' offices. That's also pretty much unheard of. What resulted was something I've never seen before, which is a letter out of the FBI recommending a temporary freeze. I don't know any procedure for doing that. It had no sign-off from anybody in any U.S. Attorney's office. Again, it's just bizarre incident after bizarre incident after bizarre incident after bizarre incident. And in the backdrop to this are out-of-court statements made by Lee Zeldin, our EPA guy, and Ed Martin, this interim U.S. attorney, derogatory about the bank and the recipients of the program. It started with graft, but they went on to make allegations of fraud and criminality. Well, there are a number of things that are wrong with that. First is, allegations of fraud and criminality are defamatory per se. It's not the kind of stuff anybody should be saying about anybody else falsely. It's particularly bad when it's the prosecutive branch that is saying things falsely about people that they're either seeking to investigate or are investigating or are prosecuting. The U.S. Attorney's Manual, now called the Justice Manual, is rife with warnings not only to the Department of Justice employees, but to the agencies working together on investigations that you don't say derogatory things about people while you're investigating them. You let your pleadings do the talking. That is federal prosecution 101. So all of these false statements that are being made, they had the chance to try to prove their false statements, by the way, and a federal judge took a look at the best they could do and said there is no evidence here of any criminality, period. So you have the magistrate judge who shot down the warrant, and you've got the federal judge who shot down the argument that there was fraud or criminality here. And yet they persist. So the aberration here from proper prosecutive process is really telling. And both in this committee and in the Judiciary Committee, I'm going to keep digging at this, because over and over and over again, there are multiple red flags flying of prosecutorial misconduct, of legal violations, and ultimately probably we'll find out from civil litigation, either under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983 or in a straight defamation case, what the heck went on. But I can tell you, Madam Chair, as somebody who's had to sit in that seat as a U.S. attorney, everything about this stinks to high heaven, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Thanks for letting me take the time to discuss this when we have the witnesses here today, and we have my beloved friend, Senator Barrasso, and Governor Gordon here.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator Whitehouse. And we'll now turn to introductions of the nominees. And this morning we have the pleasure of being joined by Governor Mark Gordon and Senator John Barrasso from the great state of Wyoming, which Senator Lummis also here, as we're privileged to have her on the committee. So, Governor, thank you so much for being here, and I'll recognize you for your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Capito Ranking Member Whitehouse, distinguished members of the committee, my friend Cynthia, John, great to see you. I'm Mark Gordon, 33rd Governor of the 44th State. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here to provide a brief introduction to Brian Nesvik, President Trump's nominee to become the 19th Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Before I do that, though, I want to say how nice it is to see my friend Cynthia here and to know that there are other senators here like Senator Ricketts that I've served with before. It's a particular pleasure to be able to introduce my former director of Wyoming's Game and Fish Agency, retired National Guard Brigadier General, and most importantly, close friend. Brian could not be more qualified and suited to serve in this important and pivotal role. But before I highlight his impressive career, I want to acknowledge Brian's remarkable family, and especially his wife, Penny, to whom I owe an enormous apology. I really did not think Brian would ever consider this position, having just retired from the Game and Fish, but I knew he was the right person for the job, and I knew how much he was looking forward to getting back to the ranch and spending more time with his family. But then I'm not sure why any of us had any idea where we might be in 6 months after we packed up camp last September in 4 inches of freshly fallen snow. For that matter, I don't think any of us expected to see a young grizzly boar so close to the trail 60 minutes into our ride out from the Absarokas on a very sloppy, cold, wet, snowy, lightning, and thunder-filled day. One thing I do know is that Brian has an abiding commitment to his family, to this nation, and to service. Members of the committee, it is my honor to introduce Brian Nesvik, a man for whom I have the utmost respect. I have known and worked with Brian for many years. I asked him to be director of our Game and Fish 6 years ago when I became governor, though I could just as easily have asked him to become my adjutant general for Wyoming's National Guard, where he served 35 years, retiring as a brigadier general in 2021. We share a friend who neighbored my ranch and served with Brian in Iraq. Terry told me stories of a game warden who could rope, ride, shoe a horse, and lead men. He told me this fellow had good sense of humor and an unparalleled ability to find solutions to difficult circumstances. Brian also has 29 years of experience with the Wyoming Game and Fish, our nation's first such agency. Wyoming understood how critical it was to preserve and recover wildlife at the turn of last century when Wyoming people came to realize if we weren't careful about our wildlife management, we would lose one of the most precious assets and what made our state the place where the deer and the antelope play. Wyoming is home to the nation's first national park, first national forest, first national monument. Our conservation ethic runs deep in our DNA. It is an ethic spoken of in Teddy Roosevelt's New Nationalism speech, which I know you all know. Conservation means development as much as it does protection. I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful use the generations that come after us. As ranchers, my wife and I are committed to stewardship. We were proud to partner with our neighbors and the Game and Fish to conserve sage-grouse habitat in one of Wyoming's core areas. Brian exemplifies Wyoming's approach to fostering stewardship, working with stakeholders across all interest groups. He recognized what Aldo Leopold articulated in his opus Game Management. Quote, "The central thesis of game management is this: game can be restored by the creative use of the same tools which have heretofore destroyed it: the axe, plow, cow, fire, and gun." End quote. Brian's real-world, on-the-ground experience managing Wyoming's 800 species of fish and wildlife made him an outstanding director of our Game and Fish and will be a tremendous asset to the Trump administration and our country. Brian has taken part in and led Wyoming's efforts to successfully recover some of the world's most charismatic megafauna. In Wyoming, that's grizzly bears, gray wolves, as well as some of our treasured species that were declared extinct, like the black-footed ferret, which our Game and Fish recovered. His leadership continued to keep Wyoming free of destructive zebra and quagga mussels, especially with interstate transport concerns and new vectors, such as aquarium plants. He is a strong leader, a humble leader, who brings a sense of mission and professionalism. Can I proceed? To any critical conversation. For example, Brian oversaw the development of the state's chronic wasting disease management plan, one of the most challenging wildlife diseases impacting deer, elk, and moose on the landscape today. He's been a leader for the nation in work to prevent wildlife vehicle collisions, ensure wildlife can move freely through wildlife crossings, and preserving migration routes for big game. Alongside the Wyoming legislature, Brian led in efforts to reform the state's most challenging wildlife management issues under the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force. With a background in law enforcement and as a game warden, he has enforced and overseen game laws, ensuring the value of North America's wildlife remains intact. Brian's truly masterful in developing bipartisan relationships at all levels and bringing together sportsmen, outfitters, conservationists, and those who enjoy the outdoors for sound, durable policymaking. Brian's leadership on behalf of the state of Wyoming has been exemplary, while it hasn't been easy. And as I mentioned, Brian has had to wrestle with some of the most challenging issues facing wildlife today. From our work to recognize our state's primary role in managing grizzly bears to recovering the black-footed ferret from extinction. Brian understands these issues. He knows the science, and he knows who to call. But he can be assiduous. Brian and I were discussing outlaw horses on a previous pack trip through the most remote part of the lower 48. Cynthia, you know that place. and the injuries we have received because of their behaviors. I told him about a flashy little gray that had dumped me on my head in front of my 8-year-old daughter years ago, and he told me about a roan that had bucked him off and broken his wrist after a day working cattle. He told me he was going to sell that roan to someone so nobody would get hurt. But there the roan was at our camp on the Wood River last fall, bucking panniers off on day 5. I thought he was gone from Remuda, I said, though I know he was an optimist at heart, and he replied, well, I thought he'd pack all right. Brian ought to know. I can think of no one who spent more time outdoors or knows more about the outdoors than Brian. Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity and for your forbearance on my overtime. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for being here. Senator Barrasso,
Well, thank
former
you
chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Whitehouse, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to take just a few moments to help in joining in the introduction of Brian Nesvik. He's been nominated to be the head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's critical to Wyoming and the nation. It's an agency that plays a crucial role in the conservation and management of our nation's natural resources. This agency serves as the cornerstone of our efforts to protect wildlife while following the best available science. From managing national wildlife refuges to implementing programs that enhance habitat restoration, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are the front lines preserving our nation's resources. Over the last 4 years, politics has driven much of the agency's decisions rather than following the science. For example, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem population of grizzly bears has been fully recovered for 20 years. Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, all agreed for 20 years. Grizzly bear fully recovered. In my home state of Wyoming, we are proud of its lead role in leading this recovery and investing over $50 million to this end. Brian Nesvik played a large role in advocating for Wyoming and advancing these policies. He served as the Wyoming Game and Fish Director since 2019 until his retirement in September. He grew up in Cheyenne, graduated from Cheyenne East High School, went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree in Wildlife and Fisheries Biology and Management from the University of Wyoming. He was selected by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department to serve as a wildlife law enforcement technician in 1995. He's dealt with significant endangered species issues all the way throughout, involving both grizzly bears and wolves. He dealt with complex elk management challenges in the herds of the elk around Yellowstone National Park. In March of 2019, he was appointed to be the director of Wyoming Game and Fish, but additionally, I actually first met him when he served in the Wyoming Army National Guard. He's been in the Guard since '86. Currently serves as the commanding general for the Wyoming National Guard and assistant adjutant general holding the rank of brigadier general. I visited with him when he was leading troops in Kuwait. I think Cynthia was there with me on that trip when we were there for Thanksgiving with him, where we saw that he was a respected and admired leader of the troops. He served as a commander of 2 deployments to Operation Iraqi Freedom in Baghdad, in southern Iraq, and in Kuwait. In 2005, he was awarded the Bronze Star Medal by the U.S. Army for his service. He's a graduate of the Army War College, holds a Master's of Science degree in Strategic Studies. He is smart, he's capable, he's strategic. I want to congratulate him on this nomination. I look forward to working with him on all of these important issues and what are the very best for Wyoming and for the nation. Once again, thank the committee for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you for being here. Don't be a stranger. Thank you. And Senator Lummis, I know you wanted to say some words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I want to pile on when it comes to Brian Nesvik. In Wyoming, we have a highly respected author, C.J. Box, who has created a series of books, national bestseller, always on the New York Times bestseller list, where the protagonist is a guy named Joe Pickett. And Joe Pickett is a game warden in the series. And it's as if he styled, Chuck Box styled his Joe Pickett series after Brian Nesvik. Brian is Wyoming's real-life Joe Pickett. And here's what I love about Brian and this job. He was first a game warden, then regional wildlife supervisor, then chief game warden, then wildlife division chief, and finally director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And as John says, Wyoming Game and Fish Department was the first of its kind in America. This is a state that loves and respects and nurtures its wildlife, and Brian Nesvik has been a true leader in that regard. And of course, as John mentioned, if that wasn't enough, he also served the Wyoming Army National Guard for 35 years, retiring as Brigadier General. Now, being a rancher myself and knowing that's where I want to retire, the fact that you would retire from the Wyoming Game and Fish and allow us to recruit you to come back and do the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service job is a testament to Brian, to your willingness as a public servant to serve this nation. And you know it from the ground up. You were a boots on the ground game warden. And that's the kind of person I want in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, someone who's held every aspect of game and wildlife management close to his vest. He's also worked closely with federal, state, and local partners. I know he was the head of the organization of Western Wildlife Managers. He was on the board of the National Organization of State Wildlife Managers. So he has worked with every state, and particularly with the Western states where our issues are somewhat similar with regard to wildlife. And he knows the players, he knows who to call, he knows the people who are trying to manage wildlife and do it well. And he's the right guy for this job at the right time. Wyoming's led the way in species protection, and especially with sage grouse. You know, we have the most sage grouse of any state in the country, and our efforts to be forward-looking about sage grouse management have allowed us to continue to keep that species at the forefront in Wyoming, in spite of the fact that it's created real challenges for Wyoming's development. And Brian has been involved in those efforts as well. So I know he'll bring this approach to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He'll work on cooperative federalism. That is the way these agencies were designed. Wildlife and fish are primarily managed by our states. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service plays a collaborative, supporting role, not the primary role. And Brian Nesvik understands the difference, and he's the right guy at the right time. So I want to thank you, Brian, for accepting this call to service, and I look forward to working with you in your new role to make sure that our country appropriately nurtures this great resource, this wonderful blessing we have. I say it as an angler more than as a hunter, but like you, Governor, I've been to Hawks Rest, the most remote place in the lower 48. And when I got there, after riding 26 miles on a horse, I looked at the ground and thought, I'm never going to be able to get off this horse because my knees are going to buckle and I'm going to fall flat on my rear end. But it's the amazing blessing of being raised in the West that we have places like that are so remote that you just feel grateful that you had a chance in your life to be there and see these things. And that's the kind of person I want in this job. Brian's the right person, and I strongly, highly endorse his nomination. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. So I will excuse the senator and the governor and ask the witnesses to move forward. And I will introduce the other two. I don't think I can say anything more about Brian.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Not without lying.
No, without lying. Yeah. Our next nominee is Jess Kramer. She's a former staffer of mine, as I mentioned earlier, and I could not be happier to introduce her this morning. She brings a wealth of experience working on water policy. She has worked for the Wisconsin and Florida state governments previously served at the EPA, worked on Capitol Hill, and advocated for private entities. In these positions, she combined her diligence and charisma to support policies to improve our nation's water quality and the development of water infrastructure. So welcome, Jess. Our final nominee this morning is Sean Donahue. Mr. Donahue currently serves as the special advisor to Administrator Zeldin at the EPA. Prior to that position, Mr. Donahue worked as a counsel for a solar energy company and as associate at a Buffalo, New York law firm where he practiced environmental law. Mr. Donahue has also served 3 years at the EPA during the Trump administration. He is a graduate of the University of Central Florida and Florida State University College of Law. Welcome. So before we go to opening statements from our nominees, I will ask you all to rise, and I'm going to swear you in. So if you'd raise your right hand, answering the following questions. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give to this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And I'll just go down the line. Brian? I do, Madam Chairman. Let the record show that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative, so we will now proceed to their opening statements. And thank you. Guys can be seated. And Mr. General Nesvik, we will start with you.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee. I am honored to be here today to discuss my nomination by President Trump to serve as the 19th Director of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Senator Brasso, Governor Gordon, Senator Lummis, I really appreciate your support, your gracious comments here today, and I thank all of you who are just incredible public servants for our home state of Wyoming, but also for our country. Thank you for that and your willingness to serve as well. I'm joined here today in person by my wife Penny, my son Rudy, and my daughter Aspen, and then virtually by my daughter Brittany. I'm also joined here in person and virtually by many friends and family and supporters from across the country. I've spent the last 38 plus years serving my state and country in a variety of roles. I grew up in Wyoming and was blessed by my parents who provided me outdoor experiences at a very young age. I developed an early interest and love for wildlife and the wild places that they lived and worked, which shaped my life's work. I've worked as a game warden and a wildlife manager in the field, interacting directly with wildlife and the people who entrusted me to manage their natural resources and trust. I know how to put tire chains on a four-wheel drive pickup in a snowstorm, how to classify deer from a helicopter, and how to patrol some of America's most remote and wild country from a horse. And I know how to lead. I served in the military and began my career as an enlisted man, starting as a private, training to defend our great nation with my boots muddy and my face dirty. Serving in uniform is a strong part of our family culture and history. My father served, my brother served, and two of my grandfathers fought in World War II. In my dual careers, both as a wildlife manager and a soldier, I earned the privilege to lead and embrace the responsibility that came with that honor. Ultimately, I served as my state's chief game warden and then its game and fish director. And in my military career, I had the incredible opportunity to lead our nation's best and brightest in a variety of roles, including on 2 combat deployments. My military career culminated with my promotion to Brigadier General and the opportunity to command the Army National Guard for almost 4 years. These experiences and opportunities, starting in the field and working my way up, have prepared me well to work complex, convoluted problems into decisive action in uncertain environments. I'm proud of my work on big game migration corridors, protecting my state from the scourge of invasive species, and working with the public and talented wildlife managers to recover species listed under the ESA. I am grateful for the people who worked with me toward these ends. I cherish the opportunity to build a strong track record working with ranchers, farmers, sportsmen and women, tribes, and all people who care about natural resources. These people, citizens of our great nation, are the ground level of our government and the foundation of the mission of the service and my personal leadership mission. Respecting values, building effective teams, communicating candidly and transparently, leading by example, and treating all people with dignity and respect are the core tenets of my leadership commitment. If confirmed, I will bring these attributes and my continuing dedication to a wider array of Americans and international partners. Foremost, I will serve the American people and their natural resources, specifically wildlife, fish, and plants, and I will serve with honor and integrity. Every day I will lead the employees of the Fish and Wildlife Service. I know firsthand the dedication of these incredible people to their profession and their country. If confirmed, I will execute my charge decisively and work every day to provide the men and women of the service with the leadership that they deserve and the American people expect. I look forward to working with the team to deliver and achieve together and in the best interests of America. When this committee, its members, other senators, other members of the House need my attention to requests or initiative in informing you, I will be available and prompt. President Trump's America First agenda includes building a government that better serves the citizens of our country, and there are immediate and transformational opportunities to demonstrate that. Improving the service's interactions with the public, simplifying regulations, accelerating permitting with technology, and relying more on education, voluntary compliance, and verification. I share Secretary Burgum's vision that innovation outperforms regulation. Creative, innovative, purposeful action is a proven hallmark of American success. President Teddy Roosevelt personified such action as America's earliest and most influential conservationist. His leadership and achievements have long influenced my career in wildlife conservation. His oft-quoted arena metaphor combines thoughtfulness, pragmatism, and courage. If confirmed to enter this arena, I will dare greatly. I am honored by President Trump's nomination and Secretary Burgum's support, and I'm thankful to all of those who have supported my potential appointment. Thank you again, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, members of the committee. I look forward to answering your questions here today and then any that you may submit for the record.
Thank you. Ms. Kramer?
Good morning, Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and distinguished members of this committee. My name is Jessica Kramer, and I am honored to have the opportunity to appear before you today. It is my privilege to come before this committee as President Trump's nominee for the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water at the Environmental Protection Agency. I want to thank President Trump for the confidence instilled in me through this nomination, and Administrator Zeldin for his support in this nomination as well. If confirmed, it will be the highest honor of my career to work every day with the dedicated career staff in the Office of Water to protect human health and the environment and to support Administrator Zeldin as he does the same. I want to thank my family, my husband Tony Fry, who is here with me today, my parents Deb and Dennis Kramer, my sister and brother-in-law Christy and Ben Cubs, my 2-year-old daughter Daphne, and the little boy my husband and I will welcome this summer for providing unwavering support through this process every step of the way. Anyone who has ever had a toddler will understand that my husband and I made a strategic decision to not have our daughter come support me in person today. However, she has heard this statement multiple times at this point, and I can confidently say she is in full support. EPA's mission has a deep-rooted place in my heart. I was raised on 80 acres of land in central Wisconsin, where my family grew and sold Christmas trees. My parents worked to balance the agricultural use of that property while supporting the robust wildlife that roamed the land, as well as with ensuring we had safe drinking water from the private well our home utilized. Growing up, I learned the importance of stewardship, and that is what drove me to become a natural resource major in my undergraduate studies, and ultimately to focus on environmental law in earning my legal degree. Coming out of law school, I was privileged to join the first of 3 state agencies I would have the pleasure of serving through my career thus far, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I started my career as an environmental enforcement specialist, and the case that sticks with me the most was working with a community that had a lead action level exceedance and tripped the regulatory requirement at that time to begin replacing 7% of their lead service lines every year. I worked closely with that community to ensure they were providing safe drinking water while also utilizing a pathway for compliance that ensured that the system was not regulated out of business. 4 years ago, during my time in EPA's Office of Water under the first Trump administration, my career felt like it had come full circle. I was in a home in Newark, New Jersey, taking water samples as we worked through the challenge that was unfolding related to elevated levels of lead in drinking water. Through our cooperative work with both the state and the community, we were able to avoid a crisis situation and utilize the ultimate cooperative federalism framework to ensure the public health of the community was protected. In addition to those positions, I have served as an environmental prosecutor and defense attorney for the Wisconsin Department of Justice, a government affairs specialist for drinking water and wastewater associations, advocating for a polluter pays model as it relates to PFAS contamination, and the deputy secretary for regulatory programs at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. In saving the best for last, I also supported this very committee as water counsel for then ranking member Capito, where I led negotiations for the minority on the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act of 2021, which passed off of the Senate floor 93-7. Each of these positions has further refined my true passion for securing access to clean and safe water services for everyone in this country. Each of these positions has also instilled in me the vital role of cooperative federalism as it plays in this country's construct of environmental protection. Through these roles, I have also seen firsthand the importance of a thoughtful, legally and scientifically sound regulatory framework. A regulated community has no hope for compliance if it does not have a definitive and clear framework to work from. Additionally, each of these positions has shaped my perspective on the importance of common sense in regulation. For example, regulating water systems across this country out of business through siloed rulemakings without providing an achievable path for compliance is simply not good government, nor is it good public health policy. If I am confirmed, I will work every day to weave each of these principles into sound, durable, and understandable policy and regulation as I work to support Administrator Zeldin. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to hearing your priorities and answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jess. Mr. Donahue.
Chairman Capito, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and esteemed senators, it is an honor and a privilege to be here today and testify before you as you take part in the important advice and consent responsibility of this esteemed body and consider me for the General Counsel post at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I greatly appreciated the opportunity to meet with many of you and your staff to hear about the issues impacting your constituents, your views on the EPA, and how the new administration can find ways to improve EPA's regulations and processes, ensure a predictable and durable regulatory regime for the American public, and realign the agency to put it in the best footing to fulfill its core mission of protecting human health and the environment to ensure the brightest possible future for generations to come. I would also like to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to a few others. First, I would like to thank President Donald Trump for nominating me for this position. I would also like to thank Administrator Lee Zeldin for his tireless efforts, his supportive and steady hand, and for entrusting me with this important role. I would like to thank the dedicated and hardworking career staff at EPA for their tireless work to advance the agency's mission. And in particular, I would like to thank the impressively talented career staff attorneys in the Office of General Counsel, I believe they're watching, I hope they are, who I hope to rejoin if confirmed. I genuinely believe that they are the best and brightest the world of environmental law has to offer. I must also take the time to thank my partner, family, friends, and colleagues, many of whom are here today. On a personal note, I grew up on the Space Coast of Central Florida, where I had the privilege of watching what seemed at the time to be a very regular and routine thing, at least for me, space shuttle and rocket launches from the nearby Kennedy Space Center. Things changed when the space shuttle program ended in the early 2010s, and I witnessed my hometown ravaged by the loss of jobs and a crippled economy, which was already severely hurt by the lingering effects of the global financial crisis. Things got worse for me personally, aside from the lack of launches. My father lost his well-paying job, and our family situation and outlook for the future changed dramatically and rapidly. You may remember that as a result of the cancellation of the Space Shuttle program, NASA was forced to rely on Russian spacecraft to get our astronauts and scientists to the International Space Station. And as you might suspect, the decision to cancel the program affected many families and their livelihoods in both tangible and direct ways in the form of economic hardship and indirectly by posing severe and serious national security threats and limiting our country's scientific capabilities. If you recall, one of the reported motivations for this tragic policy change was concerns about climate change. I share this story with you today to illustrate how short-sighted, ideologically driven policy decisions here in Washington, D.C. impact not only Americans' livelihoods, but also the security of our great nation. I'll go ahead and answer what I believe will be a question posed by some on the committee today. Yes, according to many scientists, the climate is indeed changing. And yes, according to many scientists, human or anthropogenic causes are contributing to the experienced greenhouse gas effect. But we should not forget that everything done here in DC has real-world consequences that impact real people, their jobs, their futures, the price of the pump or the charging station, the cost of groceries, and our national security. Turning next to my qualifications, I've worked in both state and federal government and in the regulated community. While my background and interests were initially in financial services, I made the jump over to the environmental world and never looked back. I started this journey at EPA during the first Trump administration, where I was in the Office of the Administrator and the Office of Land and Emergency Management. I quickly grew to love the agency, adore its capable staff, and appreciate the complex and dynamic area of environmental law, which, as you all know, I'm sure, is a continuously exhilarating, engaging, and intellectually stimulating area to practice in. Following my service at EPA, I was an associate at a prominent regional firm. I worked for a solar company and recently landed back at EPA, where I've served first as the Principal Deputy General Counsel and more recently as a Senior Advisor to the Administrator. And I sit before you today as the President's nominee for General Counsel at the EPA, and I'm running out of time, so I look forward to answering your questions both here and in the form of QFRs. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, all three, very much. And before we start the individual questioning, I'm going to ask you three questions. And I'll just, usually we do this at the end, but I forget, so they put it in the beginning for me. So, do you agree, if confirmed, to appear before this committee or designated members of this committee and other appropriate committees of this Congress to provide information subject to appropriate and necessary security protections with respect to your responsibilities?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I do.
Yes.
I do.
Thank you. Do you agree to ensure that testimony, briefings, documents, and electronic and other forms of communications of information are provided to the committee and its staff and other appropriate committees in a timely manner?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Finally, do you know of any matters which may or may not have been disclosed that may place you in conflict of interest if you are confirmed?
No, ma'am.
No.
No.
All right. We will start the first round of questions, and my first question is for Brian Nesvik. You obviously, we've heard, that have served at every level almost within your state. And we know that the Fish and Wildlife, the service has regional and field offices. So I'm sure you've interacted, but they do not always have the same depth of knowledge as, say, a state wildlife agency may have on an issue. I've heard from my West Virginia government officials of instances when they've tried to advise the agency on these local issues, and it's sort of fallen on deaf ears. So, because of your interactions in the past, will you please share your experience as Director of Wyoming Game and Fish with your department's efforts to coordinate with those state, regional, field offices, and how that experience will inform your efforts to strengthen the relationship between the service and those state agencies?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly I have had many years of opportunity to interact with and work directly with different employees of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, all the way from field employees up to previous directors. And so one of the things there's certainly at times there's this natural tension and friction between state and federal agencies, but I think one of the things that's been very helpful for me and would be helpful for me in this position if I'm confirmed is understanding both my frustrations with some of those decisions and interactions, but also understanding what challenges those folks face as well. Certainly, the Fish and Wildlife Service is guided and directed by congressional action and laws, as are state agencies, and a lot of times those interests are conflicting. And I recognize that and look forward to being able to bring my experiences and maybe a little bit different perspective to the United States Fish and Wildlife if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed.
Thank you, thank you. We talked about this in our office, and thanks to all three of you for your visits. ECA Section 7 consultations are an important step in the federal permitting process, ensuring that threatened and endangered species as well as critical habitats are not jeopardized. While there are deadlines the service must meet for these consultations, they are often missed. The deadlines are missed, leading to costly delays. Will you commit to expediting Section 7 consultations while ensuring wildlife and their habitats are protected?
Madam Chairman, I'm very interested, as I stated in my opening statement, in giving this issue a hard look. I've heard about this from a lot of folks, and including you, and I appreciate our time in your office the other day. And so certainly I think it's an issue that I know it's an issue I'm very interested in digging into and trying to find out where we can find some efficiencies. I'm a strong believer, as I said, in using technology. Oftentimes processes get bogged down, and there's a lot in every day there's new technology available to help with those things. And I'm interested in looking at that, and my commitment to you is that I will take the deep dive into this issue.
Great. That appreciated, and thank you. I just have to call you Jess. I can't go to the Miss Kramer much more. It's too hard for me. So I was going to ask you about what's the motivation for you to move in this direction, but I'm going to skip that question because I want to get a little bit more specific with you. In West Virginia, we saw firsthand how innovative state-led approaches can deliver real environmental results, and I'm talking about the Muddy Creek Restoration Project. It successfully restored 19 miles of waterways that was impacted by acid mine drainage using a cost-effective watershed-based strategy. And this model was faster, more efficient, less expensive. And initially, it was launched under the Trump administration. Later, it was touted by the Biden administration for its success, but it was ultimately abandoned in favor of a slower, more bureaucratic process that threatens the progress of being able to clean up Muddy Creek. If confirmed, how will you get the EPA's Water Office back to proven, results-driven approaches like this Muddy Creek model I'm speaking about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. If I have the honor of being confirmed, one of the things that we will focus on in the Office of Water is looking at every one of the regulatory matrices that we implement as the EPA and looking for opportunities for both innovation as well as expediting, ensuring that we are still fulfilling our statutory and regulatory obligations. The project you mentioned is an exact opportunity for us to try to replicate, to look for those additional opportunities, and to offer not only for other locations in West Virginia, but also across the country. And so I would hope to be able to have the opportunity to replicate that model and continue to look for other opportunities to expedite projects in a similar manner across this country.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Mr. Donahue, what is the maximum number of lawyers that you have supervised in your experience as an associate in a law firm?
Thank you for your question, Senator. It varies, but it was typically anywhere from 6, usually 8, up to 10, with summer associates as well.
All lawyers?
Not all lawyers, including summer associates.
Okay. What was the maximum number of lawyers you supervised in your job at the solar company?
None, Senator. Not at the solar company.
In your work as an associate in the Buffalo law firm, did you hold yourself out as an environmental attorney?
As an environmental lawyer, I did.
You spent 1 year and 6 months practicing law for that firm in Buffalo, correct?
I was located in that firm in Buffalo, yes, Senator.
Yeah. And you were terminated by that firm after 1 year and 6 months?
That is correct, Senator. If I may just add some color to that.
Well, I have pretty short time, so we can follow up with QFRs, because I promise you there'll be QFRs
Understood.
on this. Have you practiced law anywhere else other than that as an associate in the firm that terminated you and in the solar company where you supervised no lawyers?
Senator, I have not.
Apart from your associate experience in Buffalo and the solar company, have you practiced law in any other place?
I have not, Senator, but I was at the agency before in the first Trump administration.
Not in a legal position?
That's correct, Senator.
Have you ever taken a deposition?
I have not, Senator. This is probably the closest I've ever come to that.
Have you ever tried a case to verdict?
No, Senator. In the firm and at the solar company, we relied on, in the solar company, we relied on outside counsel.
So you were providing inside advice at the solar council rather than active litigation work?
It was an in-house counsel role, yes. But
Yep.
and
Have you ever argued a motion?
I have not, Senator. But as
You
you
know what a motion in limine is?
I do vaguely, yes.
Well, you should have been better prepped because John Kennedy asks this question.
Yes.
Have you ever authored and signed a legal pleading?
I have not, Senator. But as
There was a gap of several years between your graduation from law school and when you entered the bar in Washington, D.C. During that period, did you take the bar and fail to pass?
I did one time, Senator, yes, but
In
there
what
was
jurisdiction?
What, sorry?
In what jurisdiction did you take the bar and
Washington,
fail to
D.C.,
pass?
Senator, but there was a gap before I actually took the bar. I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to go and practice law, to be frank with you.
Under what circumstances would you counsel the EPA administrator to violate a court order?
Senator, thank you for that. I would never counsel the EPA administrator to violate a court order.
Under oath, can you assure us now that EPA is presently in compliance with the federal court decisions by Judge Ali Khan and Judge McConnell right now?
Senator, I believe that the agency is.
When a public official makes public accusations of criminal activity with no credible evidence to support the accusations, what legal liabilities and concerns does that raise?
Senator, as you mentioned in opening, potentially defamation, that sort of thing. But I'm not a criminal investigator. I'm not at the Department of Justice. I don't handle the various aspects of that criminal probe, so I'm not privy to that information.
There is an internal memorandum out of the agency's counsel office that relates that a significant number of grants were terminated based on a significant error, agency's words, in the terms and conditions for those grants. As the Washington Post reported today, an agency lawyer warned officials that they had cited contractual language that did not apply to many of the grants the EPA had ended in recent weeks. Grants had been terminated on grounds that they no longer fit the agency's priorities, referring to a clause in their grants' general terms and conditions that applied only to grants issued between August 13, 2020 and September 30, 2024. And almost half of the terminated grants were finalized outside of that relevant period. Have the grants impacted by this significant legal error been restored to the recipients?
Senator, I've seen the reporting on that. We received your letter, in fact, 2 letters yesterday on this. I was not on that email. I think it was an email, not a memorandum, but I think we're working to track an answer down for you on that.
My time has expired.
Sarah Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to all of you for your service and your willingness to serve again. I'm going to go fairly quickly here, and almost nothing I'm going to ask you was in my notes, except I'm going to start with one. Ms. Kramer, a.k.a. Jess, I'm looking forward to calling you Assistant Administrator. Could you walk me through the guidance, the new guidance regarding waters of the United States that you've offered, that the agencies provided in the context of SACIT, and why it complies with SACIT, and why the previous rule did not, speaking of ignoring court's decision, and just kind of walk us through that, why, and the prescriptive nature of the SACIT decision, perhaps, for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. And I really appreciated the opportunity to get to talk to you in a little bit more detail about WOTUS when we met. So the guidance document that was put out by the agency, I think, is hopefully is pretty clear to folks. It is a straightforward guidance document that essentially says that in implementation, EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, they're going to follow the law. And that gets exactly to your second question about what does SACIT say? What does it mean for implementation by both agencies to follow the law? To your point, SACIT was prescriptive. It was prescriptive in a number of ways, specifically focused around wetlands, which is what the guidance document focused on. SACIT held that the Rapanos plurality was correct. Which means that the significant nexus test that had been previously applied and implemented by both agencies no longer stands. And it specifically focuses on the fact that only those wetlands that are adjacent to or abutting relatively permanent waters are jurisdictional moving forward. I do have to say, while SACIT was very prescriptive in certain aspects, there are some terms and phrases of ambiguity that are remaining from the courts. I'm thinking about things like the phrase continuous surface connection, relatively permanent waters, what does it mean to be connected to a relatively permanent water, and then the age-old question of, is this ditch in or out? Mm-hmm. So paired with that guidance document, the agency released a Federal Register notice kicking open a docket to take, not kicking open a docket, that sounds very aggressive, opening a docket to take public comments related to some of those ambiguous terms and phrases. And so any potential rulemaking that would be taken by the agency would hope to shore up those remaining areas of ambiguity so a landowner can confidently stand on their property and know whether or not they have a WOTUS or they don't have a WOTUS.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful. Would you mind coming to North Dakota real early? I know you've been there, but real early in the WOTUS sort of process. We have a lot of landowners that are very familiar with the problems of the ping-ponging and, frankly, the flaws in previous rules. So would you commit to coming to North Dakota? It's
Absolutely.
Not that far from Wisconsin.
That's very true. I'll just take a northwest
Okay.
swing. No, absolutely, Senator. It would be my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, General Nesvik, first of all, I don't even know why you gave an opening statement, because after the three previous to you, you could only do worse. I mean, honestly, it can't all be true. I mean, listening to Wyoming politicians talk about their states like reading a book, it's that I want to be part of. Having said that, I feel a little bit of Penny's pain, but you referenced, or maybe it was even Senator Lummis that referenced something that Ms. Kramer also referenced in the context of these jobs, and that is references to cooperative federalism. And I would be interested in, really all three of you, if we could have the time, to just give me a little primer on what you mean by cooperative federalism. And you, having been a state leader, certainly would have a good definition, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, and I sure appreciate our time in your office yesterday. I can't look at you and not think of something that I learned, though, from our new Secretary of Interior, and that is that both North Dakota and South Dakota have badlands, but North Dakotas are badlands. That's I appreciate that question, and certainly, what cooperative federalism means to me is that there are certainly roles that are very clearly defined for both the federal government and the state government. And broadly speaking, wildlife, most wildlife species are the responsibility of the individual states to manage, with the exception of those who have been listed under the Endangered Species Act. And then there are a few other acts, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Horse and Burro Act. There's some other species that certainly have a federal role, but at the end of the day, there is an opportunity on all of those, both state-managed species and federal-managed species, for the two entities to work together with their common stakeholders to find solutions. It's a more efficient way to run government. It's better when the states and the federal government are working together on these things, and as long as they stay within their own lane on those things that are sovereign to their particular entity, whatever that may be, whether it's the federal government or the state.
I'd like to use an example in talking about what cooperative federalism means to me. In the Office of Water context, there are many statutes underneath both the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. We've talked about waters of the United States, but I'm going to focus on the Underground Injection Control Well Program in the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is an example of a program that can be delegated from the federal implementation and oversight, from the federal implementation, to the state for them to actually implement the program. The great thing about that is that the states know their resources best. Part of this is the remaining oversight role that EPA has to ensure that the states are continuing to implement these programs consistent with the requirements of the federal law, but it also allows the states the ability to be more stringent in the restrictions that they put in place, which again, states know their resources best to the extent that there is a need for a little bit of additional protection in their, from their perspective. That is the ability to do it. And so it is that, it's that joint working together, recognizing expertise of the states while also maintaining the oversight role that is required under the federal law.
All right, Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member Whitehouse, and also want to welcome the nominees and your families. I'd like to start off by thanking Ms. Kramer for your work on Chairwoman Capito's staff in crafting the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I was proud to be a part of that as well on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. And the issue of clean drinking water is just paramount. It was before the pandemic. I think it became even more so after the pandemic. And then the issue of water affordability was also very important to us. And so I want to thank you for that. These programs, as you know, are vital, particularly for rural communities like in Delaware, also disadvantaged communities. And I'm concerned about some of the executive orders that the president has put forward and how they may jeopardize some of these programs. As a matter of fact, we've been learning of pauses to the funding. And so I would love it if you could just spend a minute talking about, first of all, are you aware of some of these freezes or blocking of the funding for these water quality programs? And if so, how would you in your role really live up to the work that you helped to create?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Senator. So first and foremost, I think to address more of the back end of your question, there was a pause to review the funding that was rolling out the door initially at the beginning of the administration. I was not at the administration during the time of that pause, during the time of that review. When I joined as a senior advisor to the administrator's office, all of the funding through, especially I think about the SRFs, state revolving funds, I think about WIFIA, all of that was back and being implemented. I did learn yesterday of one state that had not been receiving money for lead replacement service lines. That was a surprise for me to learn about. The Office of Water promptly acted on that. The office, our principal deputy assistant administrator, promptly acted on that to clearly communicate the expectation that that money should be going out to the states and there should not have been a reason that it was withheld. And so anything like that if I'm in this role, anything like that were to come across my desk would receive prompt attention and action. As you talked about this funding, especially as it relates to the state revolving fund and the WIFIA program, I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about those as grant programs. They're not grant programs. They are loan programs. And so one of the great things, and I think why they've been so fundamental for so many years in this space, is that it gives the opportunities for communities to access those funds and then repay them in a way that does not put them out of business. But I do think if I was confirmed, one of the areas that I would specifically focus on is our provision of technical assistance to those small and rural communities. I'm from central Wisconsin. We're riddled with them. And so ensuring that they they have the resources they need to access those funds, that would be a huge priority of mine.
We will follow up with you on some questions for the record on everything from water affordability and making sure we had a pilot program that was going to really look at the data. We are concerned about wastewater infrastructure as well, and so would love to follow up with you on those. Mr. Donahue, I have a few questions for you as well. Do you know someone named Trent Morris?
I do, Senator, yes.
What's your relationship?
Trent Morris is my partner. He is here today.
Okay. And also, I know that property records show that you lived in the same location in D.C. and in Buffalo, and so I know he also is a part of the administration, the Trump administration. What is his role?
Senator, I believe his title is Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of Presidential Personnel.
Okay, and in working in personnel, that office is responsible for aiding, as you mentioned, the president in recruiting and vetting and nominating political appointees. Is this position that you're up for one of those positions that might be within that purview?
I believe every position that is a political appointment is indeed in that purview.
Okay. I just wanted to put that on the record. As a person who worked in state personnel, and it is very challenging with having conflicts, and so just wanted to put that on the record. And then lastly, for Mr. Nesvik, I was pleased to hear that of your leadership in the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and I am hopeful that you will work with this committee to make sure that we can pass this bipartisan legislation. Would love to have a commitment from you on that.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I look forward to working with you and with all of the members of the committee or any other members of Congress on any potential legislation.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Senator Bozeman, and then I'm going to go make my vote and come back. Senator Bozeman, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Nesvik, the 2025 State of the Birds Report highlighted long-term trends in bird populations, and while many species are struggling, ducks have remained stable, largely due to duck hunters' commitment to wetland and waterfowl conservation. Arkansas, home to some of the most important duck habitat in the country, has benefited directly from that, and the annual Fish and Wildlife Service survey is used to manage seasons in Arkansas and across the Mississippi Flyway. However, those surveys are at risk due to declining support and funding. As director, how will you ensure the migratory bird program maintains the resources needed to support Arkansas and other states safeguard the wetlands they've invested so much to preserve?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So certainly, there's requirements, there's legal requirements under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and under the way that the service manages flyways for the service to, is responsible, has a major leading role in managing migratory waterfowl. Just for the record, I'm a big supporter of ducks. You can look at the lining of my jacket, and it's got mallard ducks in it. I think that there's a lot of opportunity right now to evaluate the priorities for the service and where resources are allocated, especially in resource-constrained environments. But I think those are some of the things that you identified are part of the core mission, and so it certainly would be something I'm very interested in learning more about with you and your staff and others, but I do believe it's very important.
Thank you. Along with that, the National Wildlife Refuge system is uniquely an American success story. Public lands managed for wildlife conservation, outdoor recreation include hunting and fishing. However, over time, the system has suffered due to staffing shortages, failing infrastructure, and inadequate funding, which collectively hinder habitat management and the quality of recreational opportunities. As director, what steps will you take to begin rebuilding the refuge system so these critical assets are fully optimized for both wildlife and the American people?
Well, Senator, first I'll just tell you right up front, I completely agree that the National Wildlife Refuge System is a jewel for our country. It's in my top 5 priority list of things that I'm very interested in looking at if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed. I will tell you that I think that the refuge system provides an opportunity for the service to interact with the American public, and it also provides a venue for folks to experience the outdoors, to experience wildlife. Wildlife refuges provide a vast amount of public recreation, and also, as they were originally intended when the first refuge was created in Florida in, I believe, 1905 by Teddy Roosevelt, they're there to provide sanctuaries and places for wildlife to thrive. And so I strongly believe that the wildlife refuge system is very important, and it's something that's going to have my focus.
Yeah, very good. Ms. Kramer, Arkansas faces a range of water challenges, from agriculture needs in the Delta to drinking water infrastructure in our rural communities. One-size-fits-all federal water policy simply doesn't work in a state with such diverse needs. Can you commit to ensuring the EPA works collaboratively with Arkansas agencies, cities, and communities, respecting their role as co-regulators and engaging meaningfully in the policymaking process?
Absolutely, Senator.
Very good. How will you ensure that Arkansas continues to benefit from the strong, flexible water financing tools like the state revolving fund so that local decision makers can invest in solutions that work for their specific needs?
Thank you for the question, Senator. One of the priorities that I would have if I'm honored to fill this role would be to take a look at those financing programs, such as the state revolving funds, to look for opportunities where EPA can cut red tape that's been established across the years. There are some fundamental principles that have been set in statute by all of you that we would want to be sure that we are undertaking those and that the implementation is going properly. However, allowing for additional flexibilities where we can in things like the intended use plan, as states submit them, would be something that I would be interested in exploring.
Very good. Thank you. Thank all of you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. Senator Merkley, you are up.
Thank you all very much. And Mr. Donahue, I wanted to ask you a few questions. We have lots of grants in Oregon for different purposes that have been either canceled or put on the targeted list for cancellation. And we find a number of these somewhat confusing as to why they're being canceled. For example, a grant to reduce transportation congestion and facilitate tourism in rural Oregon. Why would that be canceled under a DEI argument?
Senator, thank you for your question. I've read the press about this. We received 2 letters from the committee yesterday as well. I haven't seen this list. I'm not familiar with it, so I can't speak to that today. I apologize.
So you don't have any conception yourself, any explanation of why this would be something that should be canceled?
As a policy matter or a legal one, I don't know enough context.
A second grant provides technical assistance to tribes and rural communities to improve water infrastructure. Is there a reason that would be canceled under DEI? Is there something the administration dislikes about water infrastructure being reconstructed in America?
I don't believe that's the case, Senator. But again, I don't know all the context. I haven't seen this memo or email, and I haven't seen this list.
Okay. Another grant is one that prepares for extreme wildfire smoke. It's a big issue in my state, not everywhere, but Oregon had the earliest, most fierce wildfires in the country last year, and then a lot of firefighters came from other states to help, and then other states were hard hit, and our firefighters went to help. But smoke is a growing problem because of people with asthma. You get hospitals flooded with people who need safe places to breathe, if you will. It also has a big impact on commerce in ways that you wouldn't anticipate, like furniture salesmen or shops that now all the furniture is smoke tainted, or wine grapes being affected and so forth. So one of the grants was to help communities prepare for extreme wildfire smoke. Is there a reason that that would be canceled under DEI?
Senator, I hear your concerns. I myself have asthma, so I apologize if throughout this I'm coughing a little bit with allergies in the air. But again, as with the others, I don't know the particulars of this, so I would be unable to comment on that.
Another grant was to upgrade a school built 100 years ago to serve as a shelter during extreme weather events. That could be smoke, that could be heat. We've had some pretty remarkable shifts. Anyone who's familiar with Portland, Oregon would be astounded to find out it hit 115 degrees in Portland, Oregon. Is there anything the administration particularly thinks is wrong with preparing to help people during extreme weather events have a safe haven?
Senator, I don't believe so, but we will look into that and the other grants.
Were all of these canceled because the administration said, let's run some AI list and anything that pops up with certain keywords is getting canceled?
I don't believe so, Senator, but I'm not sure.
Well, a lot of things were canceled so quickly, so many different grants, or put on the list for potential termination. How was that list developed?
Again, Senator, I was not involved in this. I don't know what email or memo you all are referring to yet. I haven't tracked that down.
Would the idea of just massively canceling grants because someone ran a search engine or an AI list and said, well, anything that ever mentions the word opportunity, oh, that's too close to equity, so we're going to cancel this grant? Is the administration not like opportunity for everyone?
I don't think that's the case, Senator. I think the administration is pretty clear that we want.
So if such a list was developed by running some computer program, because it was done basically overnight, you would say that was irresponsible to do in that fashion?
Not necessarily, Senator, but I would be very impressed with the technology. But I get your question and your concern.
Given all the work that goes into communities to plan these things, and often very short personnel, rural communities have very few staff to write grants and prepare. It's often like if the mayor has to do it or the city council member has to do it. They can't even afford a grant writer. They put all this work into getting these grants, and they're just wiped out by a computer program run overnight. Isn't that really unfair and unequitable to rural communities across our country?
Senator, again, I don't know if AI or computer program was used here for this. It sounds like you all have a little more information than I do myself.
Would you reverse these efforts and say, no, we've got to go back and fairly examine each grant?
Senator, if confirmed for the general counsel position, I will ensure that the best legal advice is given in all matters, including this one, to ensure that the agency is complying with the law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the list, I have, are we going back and forth? So Senator Ricketts.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I'm sorry Chairman Capito is not here because she knows how much I love this committee because we get to talk about biofuels all the time, and it's one of my favorite topics, and I know it's one of hers as well. Mr. Donahue, one of your primary responsibilities as General Counsel is implementing the agency's statutory obligations. I think Senator Merkley you were referring that to as well when you were responding back as the General Counsel. You'll give the advice to the agency with regard to what they're supposed to be doing to follow the law. One of those laws, the Renewable Fuel Standard, very clearly mandates periodic rulemakings for the renewable volume obligations. This is something where the last administration failed to comply with the law. In June of 2022, the Biden administration published retroactive rulemakings in 2020, 2021, and 2022 that underprotected biofuel volumes by billions of gallons. The 2023 RVOs were published a year later, too late in the year for producers or the fuel markets to adjust. The 2026 RVOs were due November 2024, but won't actually be published until December 2025. Again, the last administration failed to follow the law. Mr. Donahue, if you're concerned, how do you plan to comply with the clear statutory directives outlined in the Renewable Fuel Standard to provide timely, reflective RVOs?
Senator, thank you for raising this. As you did, of course, in our meeting a couple weeks ago. As Lee Zeldin, the administrator, has indicated, fixing it from the HC side is a priority for the administration, and things are in progress there. In my role, if confirmed as general counsel, I will ensure that the office provides the best, again, legal advice in this matter. But again, as I think you may be leading to, a congressional fix may be appropriate here.
Well, the congressional fix is more like on the E15, but the law is already out here, Mr. Donahue, on what the EPA is supposed to be doing with regard to their obligations on the RVOs and getting those published in a timely manner. What I'm asking you is, will you give the administration, the EPA, the advice that they need to follow the statutory RVOs and do it in a timely manner as the law prescribes?
We will follow the law, Senator, yes.
Great, that's what I wanted. General Nesvik, congratulations on your nomination. After the last 4 years, the Interior Department stands to benefit greatly from your experience as a brigadier general. And few people understand federal land management agencies better than Westerners. As governor of Nebraska, I hear about NEPA compliance issues relating to the Endangered Species Act implementation for critical energy infrastructure and other development projects. As senator, I hear about these same issues. The Fish and Wildlife Service plays a critical role in implementing the Endangered Species Act, especially through the statute of Section 7 authorities. Considering your experience in Wyoming as Game and Fish Director, how can Congress, and you mentioned this a little bit, how can Congress empower state and local stakeholders to play a more active role in Section 7 consultations with fish and wildlife?
Well, thank you, Senator. So certainly Section 7 has a real purpose and meaning, and I think it was a good piece of law, or a good portion, a good component of the Endangered Species Act when it was enacted back in 1975. I do think there are some opportunities to be more prompt and timely in the way that Section 7 consultations are completed. I look forward to being able to look and analyze exactly what processes are in place. I appreciate yesterday you shared with me some of the tools and techniques that you were able to use when you were governor. So things like that are different tools that I want to evaluate and look at to improve not only Section 7, but all permitting. There's a lot of permitting that the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for. And there's also some opportunities, I think, too, with simplifying regulations.
Great. Thank you, General. And then, Ms. Kramer, Senator Kramer had talked to you a little bit about waters of the U.S. Obviously, this is a big deal for Nebraska as well. You know, the Clean Water Act mentions navigable waters 50 times, so Congress's intent could not have been more clear about what waters the EPA has responsibilities for. We talked a little bit about, you mentioned it about landowners, but specifically, can you talk to me a little bit about agricultural producers and other development industries, and how will they benefit from President Trump's WOTUS rulemaking?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. I think so to take it from the beginning, sorry, two parts to your question. I want to make sure that I hit them both. I think to the extent that we're talking about navigable, you're right. It is said extensively through the Clean Water Act. And as a very helpful point, now we have Sackett to give us a little bit more flavor on the bones of how extensive that reach can be. And so looking forward to every stakeholder having the opportunity to provide extensive public comment as we work through the process. And once we get to the point of kicking off a rulemaking, it is vital that we hear the voices of agriculture. These are the folks that feed our country. These are the folks that ensure that we have an available food supply that makes it so that grocery prices do not eat up an entire paycheck. And so it is vital that as we walk down the process of coming up with a clear and definitive and durable rulemaking, that they have a seat front and center at the table to ensure that while we are following the mandates of the Clean Water Act, we also are doing so in a way that does not prohibit and preclude the growth of food for our nation.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kramer.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to begin by expressing my appreciation for EPA Administrator Zeldin's interest in one of my top EPA priorities, which is finally resolving the Tijuana River sewage crisis. For decades, communities in that part of Southern California have faced persistent, both environmental as well as public health impacts of untreated sewage that has flowed across the border. Now, during President Trump's first term, the late Senator Feinstein, as well as our House delegation from the San Diego region, worked to secure $300 million to expand a wastewater treatment plant in San Diego. And during the last couple of Congresses, we've worked together to secure another $300 million to complete the necessary upgrades. We recently invited Administrator Zeldin to tour the plant to see firsthand the challenges that we face. So I'd like to just begin by asking you, Mr. Kramer, how familiar you are with this issue, with the projects, because assuming you are confirmed, I'd look forward to working with you to bring this project to completion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for that question. During my first tenure at EPA under the first Trump administration, this is in fact one of the issues that I worked on, and so EPA had been appropriated that first amount of funding that you referenced, and I was involved in the consideration of the various projects that could be funded to ensure that this transboundary flow crisis, to be completely frank, raw sewage flowing anywhere in my mind is a crisis, comes to an end. And so while I left before those projects were finally selected, since I have returned in the senior advisor role, I have been brought back up to speed on exactly what's happening. And I think the challenges that we're seeing there, one, stems to ensuring that the infrastructure that is in place to ensure that these flows cease, but also to ensuring that there is communication, robust communication that allows for partnership that is required to ensure that operation and maintenance of those infrastructure investments takes place. And it's especially easy when it's in the U.S. And it's a little bit more challenging when we have infrastructure on the other side of the border that we need to be collaborating on.
So, well, that's music to my ears, your familiarity with it, your history with it, your commitment to it as a priority. And yes, collaboration is key, not just with partners south of the border, but even within the federal government. We've brought to bear U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the intricacies of the State Department's involvement here. So thank you for that. Next question is going to be for Mr. Nesvik. So I want to, first of all, thank you for your public service, both as wildlife manager in Wyoming as well as in the armed services. If confirmed, you'll be the latest in a long line of folks facing a steep learning curve on the contentious water issues in California, which require a large amount of careful attention and collaboration as well. In the Klamath Basin, for example, in the far northern part of the state, water scarcity challenges are efforts to support agriculture, restore fish populations, and improve water quality. At Lake Tahoe, invasive species and water quality concerns threaten the lake's clarity. In the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta, we're balancing the water needs of agriculture with the need to protect endangered species and adapt to our changing climate. And in Southern California, we face serious challenges like habitat loss and water scarcity, with the Salton Sea being a prime example of the need for federal and state cooperation. So each of these, let alone all taken together, are certainly tough, high-stakes issues that demand significant time, attention, and collaboration between federal and state governments, and a shared commitment to practical solutions. So I'm looking to responsible public servants to help inform the president and work with partners on the ground. And that, I guess, is my first question to you, Mr. Nesvik. If you're confirmed, are you willing to roll up your sleeves and listen to both career professionals at Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as experts within California's state agencies as you navigate these complex issues?
Yes, Senator, I appreciate that question. I know water is an extremely important issue for California. I know it's very complex. I come from a state that's a headwater state. In my entire career, I've dealt with water policy and the challenges and the contentiousness around water. In Wyoming, we say, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, and it's true. So yes, I do commit to diving deep into this issue. I know it's really important to you and your constituents, and frankly, other states as well.
Right, no, we're interconnected by the Colorado River, and that speaks again to the need for federal, states, plural, collaboration. But on just the federal government side, want to make sure that you commit to working with the state of California, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation, NOAA, and other executive agencies to ensure that we're effectively making progress on California's water and wildlife challenges, and all the states for that matter.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do have a follow-up question we'll submit for the record, just tapping you. In response to a question from Senator Bozeman, you made mention of migration patterns. I know in Wyoming you've been working on, as we have in California, on the advancing wildlife corridors as an important strategy to maintain both development and wildlife populations. So look forward to working with you on that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Sure. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for their willingness to serve their country. General, I have a lot of questions for you. We're going to meet here soon. As you probably know, Alaska has unique wildlife and management challenges, spanning 16 wildlife refuges, 76 million acres of Fish and Wildlife Service managed land. If you want a little context, that's much larger than the state of Wyoming, 16 million acres, bigger than Wyoming, just our Fish and Wildlife Service land. And hopefully you've read the ANILCA, and have you read the Sturgeon 1 and Sturgeon 2 Supreme Court cases?
I have read about, Senator, about ANILCA.
Okay.
I don't know Sturgeon 1 and
Sturgeon 1 and Sturgeon 2 recent Supreme Court cases, twice, 9-0. The Supreme Court of the United States said Alaska is unique. All these federal lands, all these federal agencies who try to shut us down were unique. It was a great, very strong statement, 9-0 twice in 2 years. So I'd like you to read those cases, and you and I are going to have a long discussion. But the Supreme Court has said that ANILCA recognizes that Alaska is different, it's unique, its vast wilderness, its subsistence needs, and the need for special treatment in the management of its resources are all reflected in the federal law ANILCA, which a lot of Alaskans don't like, I don't like, but at least there's some protections. But we're unique in other ways. When Democrats get into power, they try to crush my state, okay? This is what I call the Alaska Last Frontier lockup. 70 executive orders and executive actions, 70 from the Biden administration exclusively focused on Alaska, most of which were hurting the native people of my state. Now, why did they do this? Because the radical far-left environmental groups want to crush my state, okay? So will you work with me and the President of the United States, I'm going to get to this, to undo this illegal, by the way, most of these were illegal, 7-0. The national media never wrote the story, not one story. Can you imagine? A federal government comes and says, I'm going to crush one state and really hurt the native people, and we're going to do it illegally, and nobody ever wrote about that. It's amazing. They're not going to write about this either. Most of these actions were illegal. Yesterday, a very liberal judge in Alaska said the Biden administration's shutting down of the Anwar lease sales was illegal. New York Times, Washington Post, you going to write that story? No, because they love it when my state gets crushed. Here's help's on the way, though. Day one of this administration, the Trump administration, the President of the United States issued this executive order, unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. Day one, I want to thank the President and his team. It's undoing all the illegal stuff that they did against my state, hurting my constituents, hurting working families, especially hurting the native people. By the way, whenever you hear the Biden folks and some of my National Democrat friends talk about indigenous people and they really care about them, big asterisk, except if you're indigenous in Alaska. Then they come for you. And I got a list a mile long of how National Democrats in this city come after negatively the native people of Alaska, which really makes me mad. You can kind of tell. So will you commit to work with me on implementing the President's Day One executive order? It's very long, very detailed, on unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential and economy and jobs in my state. We're the only state that has one of these, and it's because we got crushed by Biden. Can I get your commitment on that?
Senator, absolutely. I look forward to our meeting, I think, tomorrow. And
Yeah.
I also look forward to visiting your state and learning about a lot of issues that you're very passionate about.
I'm very passionate about it, and I don't like being singled out by Democrats, Chuck Schumer, to crush my state. It's just wrong. And again, I want to thank the president, this president, for what he's doing to help Alaska. Ms. Kramer, I got a couple quick questions for you. Alaska has over 170 million acres of wetlands subject to federal jurisdiction. It's home to 63% of the waters subject to the Clean Water Act and 65% of the nation's wetlands. So again, we kind of have a little bit of issues with our federal agencies. In light of the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett, will you assure me that permafrost and permafrost wetlands are not considered waters of the U.S.?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I know you will appreciate the fact that I cannot prejudge a rulemaking outcome. However, I will commit to ensuring that we follow Sackett to the letter of the law. And if you would have me, I also would love the opportunity to come visit your state to see the features you're talking about in person, to be able to help as we walk down that path.
Great. I'd like actually commitment from all three of you to come to Alaska and visit. We have so many unique challenges. I've just mentioned two. There's a whole bunch of other ones.
Absolutely, Senator.
Absolutely.
I would love to.
And Mr. Donahue, real quick, I'm sorry I'm over my time, but these are such important issues. The EPA has a long and very negative history of oppressive tactics in my state. I've talked many times about the Chicken Alaska raid on our placer miners, okay? 20, 30 armed EPA agents, body armor, assault weapons, to arrest placer miners for Clean Water Act violations. They found zero, okay? Scared the heck out of my constituents. By the way, they were lucky. A lot of my constituents are armed. We take the Second Amendment very seriously. And then, just a couple years ago, a group of 30 armed EPA agents, some from the lower 48, were doing raids on mechanic shops in Alaska. Armed raids, 30 agents. By the way, I don't even know why the EPA has armed agents. One of my first bills was to get rid of the EPA. They just go to a state trooper and say, we're going to do something. Why does the EPA have SWAT teams? Calling Doge, right? Let's get rid of the EPA's armed brigades. What the hell is that? We don't need that in America. Can I get your commitment to, as opposed to coming up to my state with 30 armed agents scaring the heck out of everybody, working with us on compliance with the law rather than jumping to very aggressive enforcement? I mean, they should have gone to these placer miners, these mechanic shops saying, hey, we think you're violating the Clean Air Act. We want to work with you. We'll fine you, civil fine. No, they show up, 30 armed agents. By the way, the EPA never answered my questions. What were these lower 48 agents doing in my state? Did they go fishing after they? I mean, it's crazy. Can I get your commitment on this? It's a real problem. Someone's going to get hurt. And they keep doing it in my state, and we don't appreciate it.
Senator, I hear your concerns. It's not the first I've heard about this. Just to point out, this is a different office within the EPA.
It's not under your general
It's
counsel.
not OGC. It's the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. But the Office of General Counsel works hand in hand with OGC, or with OECA rather, and the regional councils in the regions, as well as the Department of Justice on a lot of this. But I can commit to you that we will look into it and hopefully see a path forward to resolve your concerns.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Senator
Chair.
Schiff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Donahue, how long have you been practicing as a member of the bar?
Since 2021, Senator.
So for roughly 4 years?
That's correct, Senator. But I graduated law school years before that, in 2017.
And as a practicing lawyer 4 years, do you know how many attorneys you'll be supervising at the EPA?
Yes, Senator. It's over 200.
Over 200 lawyers?
Yes. But thankfully, there is a very well laid out hierarchical structure.
And you would be at the top of that hierarchy, right?
That's correct.
So let me ask you, with your 4 years of experience, Can you open a criminal investigation without evidence of wrongdoing?
Senator, I'm not a crim pro expert, but the answer to your question would be no.
And if an attorney was asked to open a criminal investigation without probable cause to believe there was evidence of a crime, that would be improper and an abuse of authority, would it not?
It very well may be, yes, Senator.
And you are aware, aren't you, that a senior Department of Justice official with 24 years of experience practicing as an AUSA was asked to write a letter to a bank about the greenhouse gas reduction fund and to assert that the funds needed to be frozen because of a criminal investigation. You are aware of that?
I read about this in the press, as I'm sure you did. I was not involved and still not involved in whatever criminal probe is ongoing. I'm not.
But you have been a participant in meetings and discussions over trying to go after the greenhouse gas reduction funds, have you not?
Senator, OGC is always involved in matters of great significance as this to provide a sound legal advice.
Well, I'm not asking about the office generally. I'm asking about you personally. You personally have been involved in discussions with others at EPA about going after these funds, have you not?
Senator, I've been involved in a variety of discussions, including those concerning the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, mostly on the civil defense side once we were sued by 3 of the big recipients.
Knowing that it would be improper and abuse of power to open investigation or to allege that investigation was ongoing without evidence of wrongdoing, you are aware that a senior attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office of 24 years resigned because she felt she could not ethically write such a letter to the bank or open such an investigation. Are you aware of that?
As I indicated before, Senator, I did see those news reports, but I'm not intimately familiar with her work, or any.
Well, let me ask you this: if you were asked by Lee Zeldin to instruct the lawyers in the criminal division at EPA to open an investigation without evidence of a crime, would you instruct the attorneys to do it nonetheless?
Senator, the direct answer to your question would be no, I will follow the law.
And what should the repercussion be if attorneys, as Denise Chung alleges, instructed her to do so in the absence of probable cause? What should the consequence be for those lawyers?
I wouldn't want to comment on that, Senator.
Well, I'd like you to comment on it. You're going to be overseeing the department. You're going to be responsible for disciplining attorneys who engage in unethical conduct. So what would your recommendation be for how to discipline an attorney that would use the coercive power of the government, would announce an investigation without a basis for a political reason? What would your recommendation be? Should they continue to work at the EPA, or should they continue to work in the Justice Department?
Senator, I wouldn't like to answer hypotheticals, but...
Well, this is all too real a circumstance, not hypothetical. And the actions that are taking place right now that have caused senior prosecutors to resign over this action by EPA, that have caused other prosecutors to resign over other Department of Justice misconduct regarding the mayor of New York, the illegal actions to target law firms that represent clients or have in the past adverse to the president's personal interests. These are all terrible abuses of the coercive power of the federal government. Its most dangerous power, the power to prosecute people. We need people in all these departments who are willing to say no and are willing to sanction those who engage in that kind of unethical conduct. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Alsobrooks.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Ms. Kramer, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Nesvik, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being here, and congratulations to each of you on your nominations. Ms. Kramer, if confirmed, you will be head of the office that ensures safe drinking water and protects our watersheds. and aquatic ecosystems. And Mr. Donahue, if confirmed, you will be responsible for ensuring that the EPA follows the law. And so my questions, I'm going to begin by raising the importance of the Chesapeake Bay. And this is relevant for both of the positions that you've been nominated for. And the Bay is so important as a source of drinking water, and it's important to Marylanders. It serves as a habitat for wildlife. It drives tourism in the region and supports our seafood industry. Now, the funding that Congress recently passed continues previous funding levels for the Bay. That's $92 million for the EPA Chesapeake Bay program, and broken down, it's about $10 million for Chesapeake Small Watershed Grants, $10 million for innovative nutrient and sediment reduction programs, $8 million for the state to target pollution. That is the greatest impact on Bay water, water quality. And so I just want to ask each of you whether you can commit that you will follow the law and get those dollars on the ground without delay in Maryland.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Senator, I love the Chesapeake Bay. I will absolutely commit to that. Yes.
Thank you. And second, Congress reauthorized, this is for Mr. Nesvik, Congress reauthorized the Chesapeake Wild Program with strong bipartisan support last Congress, and Congress has provided funding for the Chesapeake Wild Program for the last 3 years. And these investments have had an outsized impact on our region. The program provided, for example, $19.7 million in grants, which leveraged over $28 million in matching funds for a total conservation impact of $48.3 million. And the funding enabled 66 projects in all, six Bay watershed states in D.C., and this led to the restoration of over 1,700 miles of freshwater habitat, the planting of more than 75,000 trees, and improved public access to our natural resources. And so I think this is a pretty good bang for the buck. So our current government funding bill includes $8 million for this small but important program. And so I just want to ask you a similar question. And that question is whether you can assure me that the Chesapeake Wild will get its full allocation of the $8 million that Congress intended, and will you make sure that the grants get out the door expeditiously?
So, excellent question. Thank you, Senator. And I am familiar with Chesapeake Bay and how important it is to many states, not just one. And it's because it's such a central and integral part of a larger ecosystem. I remember sitting in front of this committee probably 6 or 7 years ago on a bill that included funding for Chesapeake Bay. So absolutely, I think there's been some excellent, exceptional progress made there on a lot of great initiatives with water quality and wildlife habitat, and certainly interested in continuing to execute any directives or appropriations by Congress.
Okay, so you support the $8 million for that Chesapeake Wild program for Maryland?
Senator, yes, I do.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, unfortunately, and this again is for Mr. Nesvik, the latest round of Chesapeake Wild grants has faced some delays. And we've seen the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, for example, received a grant of $500,000, and the administration has frozen this funding. This project, in cooperation with private landowners, is set to protect approximately 500 acres of marsh habitat between the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge and Nanticoke River in Dorchester. And so freezing these funds, as you might imagine, really reduces efficiencies because the cost of the project could increase. And so if confirmed, will you work with me to ensure that the Fish and Wildlife Service and partner agencies can quickly release the funds for this project so that the intended restoration work can continue?
Yes, Senator, absolutely. And I have a lot of experience and have found a lot of achievement in being able to work with private landowners who are incentivized to provide good wildlife habitat. And so I'm certainly very interested in working with you on this.
Thank you. And just quickly, I only have a few seconds left for Ms. Kramer. I know the PFAS have much work you've done in this area, and you know the importance of all of the efforts that have been made. In 2024, Maryland received $124 million for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure upgrades, all through that bipartisan infrastructure law that you worked really hard on. Now, as you might know, the administration has pledged to roll back the bipartisan infrastructure law-related funding. So I just wonder whether or not you will continue to work with us and work with members of this committee to continue implementing the law, or whether you would agree to roll back in concert with the administration, the bipartisan infrastructure funding.
Thank you, Senator. I, of course, will commit to working with this committee to follow the law.
Thank you so much. Yield. Thank you.
Senator Kelly, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I want to start with Ms. Kramer. So, Ms. Kramer, thank you for being here. I want to start with the PFAS. As I've spoken about a lot in this committee, PFAS contamination is having a big impact on our groundwater aquifers in Arizona. In both Phoenix and Tucson, but especially in Tucson, we've banked groundwater for decades to create resiliency if we have to in dealing with this long-term drought. But the problem we now have is that there's PFAS contamination in our groundwater aquifers, making it hard to access our backup groundwater. So, Ms. Kramer, when you worked in the Senate, I know you helped write the water cleanup provisions included in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Do you think the programs created in that law to address PFAS contamination have been successful?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. That is a great question. I think defining success with relation to PFAS is a tough and a bit of a moving target. And I say that simply because it seems that every year that goes by, we learn more. And we also have a better understanding of the impacts that have occurred to groundwater systems and the impacts that are facing drinking water and wastewater systems as they work towards addressing these challenges. I think incremental progress is progress. Every step in the right direction is a good one, but there is a lot of work yet to be done in this space.
Is it fair to say that because of these programs, we have been able to remove some PFAS from drinking water?
Absolutely, Senator.
Right. So after those programs expire in 2026, what are the next steps that Congress and EPA should take to continue to address PFAS contamination?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I have to be mindful of the fact that I know I am not allowed to lobby in front of you to tell you what I would recommend Congress does. However, what I can tell you is two things. One is that EPA is going to be evaluating all of its tools to address PFAS. The second thing I will tell you is that along the way, if I am confirmed in this position, we will have conversations that will involve Senate staff and House staff to provide information as to what those actions are that we have, what the limitations are of the law for us to be able to go further or to address things with a finer point. And hopefully that will provide a sound basis for you, Senator, for your colleagues, for your staff, to be able to see the challenges that we face and address those head-on should you choose to do so.
All right. Thank you. And Mr. Donahue. Mr. Donahue, do you support the principle embedded in the Superfund law that parties responsible for pollution should be held to strict, retroactive, joint, and several?
Senator, the polluter pays model that's reflected there, I believe, is a very effective model for cleanup and holding polluters accountable, yes.
So that sounds like a yes. Thank you. And do you agree that PFOA and PFAS were appropriately designated as hazardous substances under the CERCLA law last year?
Senator, thank you for that. I'm not going to comment on that directly because that is a policy matter, and I am here potentially for a legal job. I know that there are other tools that many have argued are better suited for dealing with the PFAS problem without unleashing an enormous amount of liability that could be felt throughout the entire economy.
How about from a personal perspective? Do you want PFOA and PFAS to be in your drinking water?
I think the PFAS problem is it's critical that we address it, so no, I do not. I actually have a PFAS filter, or a filter that filters out PFAS at home, so no.
And does the CERCLA statute allow for EPA to create carve-outs or exemptions for specific industries or chemicals?
Senator, I think it would depend on how that's done, potentially.
No, does it currently allow for carve-outs?
No, Senator.
It does not, okay. So will you commit to ensuring EPA implements the recent designation of PFOA and PFOS consistent with the CERCLA law?
Senator, I'll commit to you that if confirmed, the Office of the General Counsel will ensure that the administrator and the client offices receive the best legal advice so that we do comply with the law, CERCLA in this case, yes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, could I have another minute or maybe 90 seconds? Back to Ms. Kramer. I also want to ask about the WOTUS definition. Administrator Zeldin has named this as one of a number of regulations the administration plans to address. A frustration I voiced for years is that the litigation around how we define WOTUS creates real problems for Arizona. Some definitions have captured literally every dry wash and ditch in the state, and others have eliminated critical protections for drinking water in Arizona. In just the last 4 years, I think there's been 3 or 4 regulatory changes for the WOTUS definition. Ms. Kramer, now that the Supreme Court has weighed in on WOTUS, on the definition, how will you work to make sure that we establish a durable definition of WOTUS that provides certainty for stakeholders across the country, including in desert states like Arizona?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I am aware of the challenges that your state faces, and I think going back to the cooperative federalism framework for just a second, that also allows some assistance outside of just the federal jurisdiction and moving forward. But with respect to WOTUS specifically, we will be following SACIT, and to the extent that we venture down a rulemaking path, the goal will be to refine those remaining somewhat ambiguous phrases and terms that are remaining in SACIT to ensure that we're doing a little refining around the edges, but hopefully to stop the ping pong that you referenced in the litigation going back and forth that does no one any good, not the regulator, not the regulated community. As we venture down that path, even before we've started to venture down that path, we will be holding robust listening sessions and opening a docket to take public comment. That was something that was kicked off by the Office of Water a couple of weeks ago at this point. Through those conversations, through that public comment process, that is the opportunity that we will have, and especially if I am confirmed, we will take those unique perspectives into account to ensure that we are regulating while acknowledging the unique challenges that face every state across this country. And to the extent that there is something along the edges that does not fall into the federal jurisdiction that would be defined via rule, that would be the opportunity for the state to be able to regulate with a little bit more stringency than perhaps where we land on the rule. But durability and the ability for people to clearly understand the rule, that's the name of the game here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the extra time.
All right, so I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record several letters of support for today's nominees. Without objection, these letters will be entered into the record. So with no further questions, I would like to thank the nominees, all 3 of you, thank you very much, and all of my colleagues for the participation in today's hearing. Senators who wish to submit written questions, I know they're all listening, senators who wish to submit written questions for the record have until 5 p.m. next Monday, March 31st, to do so. The nominees' responses to those questions are due back to the committee no later than 5 p.m. on Monday, April the 7th, and will be submitted for the record. So with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all very much.